The worst mistake good people make is believing their love can fix someone who benefits from staying broken. Let that sink in for a moment, my friends, because this one hurts. Not in the way betrayal stings, but in the way realization shatters. Today's truth is for the ones who gave their best to the worst. The ones who offered peace to chaos, loyalty to liars, empathy to emotional vampires. They weren't punished for being toxic. They were punished for being too pure around toxicity. And now, those very people who took everything burn silently in the fire of their own regret. Hey folks, imagine this. You're like a fireplace in the dead of winter, warm, steady, glowing. You invite people in, you give off light, you give off heat, and some sit beside you and appreciate your warmth. But others start tossing trash into your fire. They try to dim it, control it, burn it out. Not because they don't see your value, but because your light reveals everything they're lacking. And still, you burn for them. Still, you give. Until one day the logs run out and the fire goes cold, not from hate, but from exhaustion. See, people don't always leave you because you were too little. Sometimes they leave because you were too much for their shallow depth. Your love was too deep, your honesty too sharp, your energy too expensive for their discount souls. And yet, you were the one questioning yourself. You were the one wondering, was I too clingy, too available, too soft? Nah, you were just too real in a world full of people faking depth. They say, nice guys finish last. No, nice guys get used first. Because the world doesn't tell you the truth, folks. It says, be kind, be patient, be forgiving. And you were. But what they don't say is, be kind to the right people. Be patient with yourself. And stop forgiving what was never sorry. That's what we're breaking open today. Because the truth is, some of you have been bleeding in silence, thinking you're not enough, when in reality, you were just surrounded by people who never knew what enough looked like. My friends, if this is hitting home, don't be ashamed. Be awake. You're not the fool for loving deeply. You're the teacher. You showed them what it looks like to be loved correctly. And now that you're gone, they're left trying to replicate a feeling they never valued until it vanished. That's not ego speaking. That's karma catching up in silence. So if you've ever laid in bed wondering if they even care, wondering if they regret what they did, trust me, they do. But not because they lost control, because they lost something real. And now they have to sit in the silence of your absence and try to convince themselves that it didn't matter. That's the lie they'll tell the world. But inside, it's screaming. You, on the other hand, you're rising. Maybe slowly, maybe with shaky legs and a bruised heart. But you're rising. You're finally learning that peace isn't found in getting them back. It's found in getting yourself back. And that's the real win. So if you're ready for that kind of clarity, that kind of unshakable self-worth, write this in the comments right now. I was the blessing. Say it again. Esther was the blessing. Because you were, and it's time the world knows it. Now stay with me, because we're just getting started. Number 1, they never deserved you, but you gave anyway. The worst kind of heartbreak isn't when they leave. It's when you realize they were never worthy of what you gave. That line hits hard, doesn't it? Because deep down, you already knew. You saw the signs, the subtle emotional withdrawal, the half-hearted replies, the moments when your needs were met with silence. And yet you stayed, not because you were blind, not because you were weak, but because your heart was too damn full of hope. Hope that if you just kept giving, they'd finally understand. Hope that your loyalty could rewrite their patterns. Hope that your love would be enough to heal what they refuse to even acknowledge. Let me give you a metaphor, folks. Imagine you're a well, a deep, pure well of crystal clear water in the middle of a desert. And thirsty people come to you, not to protect you, not to appreciate your depth, but to drink until you're dry. Some even kick your stone walls, drop their dirt in your water, poison the very thing that was saving them. But you kept giving. Because that's what good people do. They give, they don't measure, they don't keep score. But what happens when the well runs dry? That's the question they never asked themselves, because they assumed you'd always be there, that no matter how many times they forgot your worth, you'd stay, that no matter how deeply they hurt you, you'd still answer. They mistook your kindness for complacency, your empathy for emptiness, your silence for surrender. But here's the uncomfortable truth. They didn't stay because they loved you. They stayed because you were useful, because your light made their shadows bearable. And that's what makes it hurt the most. Not the betrayal, not the lies, but the realization that they never saw your love as sacred. They saw it as convenient. Now you might be sitting there asking, but why did I let it go on for so long? And that's a fair question, my friend. Here's the answer. Because you weren't loving them from your ego. You were loving them from your soul. And soul love doesn't come with contracts or conditions. You weren't looking to manipulate. You were looking to heal. But that's the curse of the emotionally intelligent. We see the pain behind the mask. We don't just hear their words, we feel their wounds. And sometimes, in trying to love their trauma, we abandon our own peace. It's not stupidity, it's humanity. But make no mistake, their treatment of you was not love. Real love doesn't make you doubt your own worth. Real love doesn't drain your energy, destroy your self-esteem, or demand silence for the sake of connection. Real love nourishes, it uplifts. It's not perfect, but it's present. And what they gave you wasn't presence, it was performance. Still, you gave. You stayed up late answering their cold messages. You apologized first, even when your heart was the one bleeding. You showed up for them when they were too selfish to do the same. And worst of all, you questioned your own value just to justify their absence. But here's where it starts to shift. The moment you stopped asking, "What did I do wrong?" and started asking, "Why did I accept this?" That was the beginning of your awakening. That was the moment your light began returning, not because they changed, but because you stopped waiting for them to. Let me tell you something powerful. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left, or they sabotaged, because your light was too blinding for someone still hiding in the dark. You weren't too much, you were too real, and real triggers people who are still performing. You see, folks, there's a lie we've all been sold, that being a good person guarantees being treated well, that if you just love hard enough, it'll be enough. But that's not truth, that's fantasy. Because there are people out there who don't love, they consume. They feed on your energy, your attention, your affection, not to build something with you, but to survive their own emptiness. And when you finally stop feeding them, they don't thank you. They resent you. Because your absence reminds them of the very thing they never learned to be, whole. And let's talk about the fear, because it's real. The fear that if you stop being the giver, no one will stay. The fear that maybe you were too much after all. The fear that if you don't explain one more time, they'll never understand. But hear me now, that's not fear. That's conditioning. Conditioning from a lifetime of being taught that your worth is tied to how much you tolerate. But your soul was not made for endurance. It was made for alignment. And anything that forces you to shrink is not aligned. It's toxic. So rise, even if your legs shake, even if your heart still remembers their touch. Rise anyway, because the people who took you for granted are already feeling the fire. Not because you cursed them, not because you exposed them, but because you walked away, and you did it without rage, without a warning shot, just quiet. That's the kind of silence that screams. Now they sit with memories that used to be yours. They scroll through old texts and feel the emptiness in every word. They watch you move on and realize they were never the storm. They were the ones trying to drown someone who was the ocean. And now that the tide has turned, they finally see it. You weren't a chapter, you were the whole story. So write this in the comments if you're claiming your power back today. I was the ocean, not the puddle. Say it out loud. Let them feel the shift. Let yourself feel the truth. Because the moment you believe it, you start to rise in ways they can't follow. You don't need their apology. You don't need their regret. You need your freedom. And you already have it. Stay with me. We're about to go deeper, because the ones who mistreated you, they saw your light. But what they never expected was that one day you'd stop shining for them. And that is where the regret begins. Number 2, they saw the light and tried to use it. Some people don't love you. They just love what you do for their emptiness. That's where it begins, my friends. The slow, sick realization that not everyone who smiles at your light comes with good intentions. Some aren't drawn to your warmth because they want to protect it. They're drawn because they want to consume it, to bask in it, to drain it. And once they've taken enough, they move on, leaving you wondering if any of it was real. Picture this. You're a lighthouse, not the flashy kind, the grounded kind, built through storms, standing through pain, anchored in purpose. You shine, not to be admired, but to guide. You shine because that's who you are. And then one day, someone shipwrecked shows up at your shore. Lost, chaotic, unstable. You take them in, you give them shelter, you light their path. But instead of gratitude, they start blaming you for the waves. Instead of respect, they expect you to dim so they can feel big. And when you refuse, they call you selfish, cold, changed. You didn't change, you just stopped being their battery. Let's be real. People who are emotionally starved don't seek nourishment. They seek supply, a quick fix, an emotional IV drip. And you gave like it was your job. You were the emotional paramedic to their self-inflicted wounds. You didn't just listen, you absorbed. You didn't just care, you carried. And they knew it. Oh, they knew exactly how much you felt. That's why they kept pushing, testing, taking, because the more you gave without boundaries, the more they believed they owned your light. And the worst part, they made you question your own shine. That's the real crime. They turned your love into a liability, your empathy into exhaustion. They trained you to believe that if you ever stopped giving, you were the villain. That's how manipulators work. They don't chain you physically, they chain your conscience. Your compassion becomes your cage. And that's why walking away feels like betrayal, even when it's survival. My friends, they saw your soul, but they didn't fall in love with it. They tried to use it. Because being close to someone as kind, as patient, as spiritually grounded as you, it made them feel important, safe, but not safe enough to grow, not safe enough to reflect, just safe enough to feed off you without changing a thing. You weren't just a person to them. You were a mirror, a painful, sacred mirror that reflected everything they were not ready to face. And so, like cowards do, they broke it. Now you might be thinking, why me? Why do I always attract these people? Let me flip that question on its head. It's not why you attract them. It's why you keep accepting them. Because yes, broken people are everywhere, but it's your own unhealed belief that says love means self-sacrifice. That to be loved, you have to prove you're worthy by enduring pain. That's the root. And once you start healing that, once you realize your value isn't tied to how much you can tolerate, you stop being their lighthouse. You start being your own. Here's the brutal honesty. They never hated your light. They feared it because it made them feel exposed, uncomfortable, accountable. And instead of rising to meet your energy, they tried to dim yours to match theirs. But dimming your soul to fit into their darkness was never the answer. And now that you've pulled back, now that you're no longer feeding them, now that your light is no longer theirs to claim, they're lost again. But this time, your lighthouse is no longer open. They scroll through your life now like it's a museum of what they can't touch anymore. They pretend it doesn't bother them, but silence is tricky. It amplifies what pride tries to hide. Every quote you post, every glow-up they glimpse, every laugh you share without them, it reminds them of the light they tried to extinguish and failed. Because here's the truth, they thought they could destroy you, but they forgot one thing. You were the source, not a spark they lit, a whole fire they couldn't contain. So let's set the record straight. Your kindness was never the weakness. Your patience was never permission. Your silence was never submission. You were just giving them a chance to rise with you. But they chose to sink, and now you don't have to do anything. You don't need revenge. You don't need to expose them. Just shine. Because nothing hurts a taker more than seeing the one they drained become even brighter without them. If you feel this in your chest, write this in the comments right now. My light is not for sale. Say it, believe it, show it. Because the ones who tried to dim you are already feeling the heat of your glow from a distance. And this is only the beginning. Stay with me. Because next, we're diving into how emotional manipulation feeds on empathy and how you're about to break that cycle for good. Number 3, they feed on empathy and blame you for the hunger. They didn't love you. They loved that you kept breaking yourself just to make them whole. That's the part nobody warns you about, my friends. That sometimes the most dangerous people don't come with fangs and fire. They come with wounds and whispers. They don't demand, they guilt. They don't attack, they cry. And to someone wired for empathy, that's the perfect trap. Let's break this down. Imagine you're a healer walking through a battlefield. You see someone wounded, crawling, covered in emotional scars. Your instinct isn't to run, it's to help, to stop, to pour water into their cracked hands. You don't ask if they've changed. You don't ask if they're ready. You just give. Because deep inside you, there's a belief that love can rescue anyone. And it's beautiful, noble even. But it's also dangerous, because not every wound wants to heal. Some wounds want attention, some want control, and some just want someone else to bleed beside them. You gave your empathy to someone who saw it as weakness. You tried to be the safe place for a person who only knew how to set fires. And the cruel irony, the more you gave, the more they resented you for it. Because deep down, they knew they could never match your love. Your peace made them feel chaotic. Your forgiveness reminded them of their shame. And instead of rising to your level, they tried to drag you down to theirs. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Emotional manipulators seek out empaths like predators seek out prey. But they don't pounce, they mirror. At first, they reflect your light back to you. They say all the right things. They tell you, no one's ever understood me like you do. And it feels real. It feels divine. But slowly, the mask slips. And what's underneath isn't love. It's entitlement. They start taking without asking, demanding without appreciating. You stop being a person and you become a function. Their emotional sponge, their constant fixer, their therapist, their cheerleader. And when you finally get tired, when your cup runs dry and you say, I need something too, suddenly you're too sensitive, too needy, too much. That's the part that breaks you, not the silence, not even the lies, but the gaslighting, the way they rewrite the story to make you feel like you're the problem for needing anything at all. They convince you that your emotions are an inconvenience, that your boundaries are betrayal, And slowly, without realizing it, you shrink. You start apologizing for speaking up. You start justifying their absence. You start calling manipulation trauma and disrespect confusion. You rewrite your own reality to fit their story because yours feels too painful to face. And that, my friends, is how empathy becomes self-abandonment. But let me tell you something sacred. That was never your job. You weren't brought into their life to be their emotional janitor. You weren't created to carry their unhealed childhood. You weren't placed here to break so they could feel whole. You're not their rehab. You're not their redemption. You are a soul, not a service. You tried everything, didn't you? You softened your voice. You shrunk your needs. You delayed your healing just to keep them company in their pain. And still, it wasn't enough. Because with takers, it never is. Their hunger isn't your fault, but they'll make it feel like it is. They'll say you gave up too soon, that you didn't understand them, that you never truly loved them. And they'll say it loud, to friends, to family, to anyone who'll listen. Because manipulators don't want the truth. They want the narrative. And the narrative is this: I was broken and they left me. But here's what they'll never say out loud: I was broken and I broke the one person who tried to love me through it. That's the part that haunts them. That's the part they hide. You, however, are waking up, slowly, surely. You're starting to realize that being an empath isn't about enduring abuse. It's about discerning where your light belongs. You don't have to save everyone. You don't have to pour into people who poke holes in your cup. You're allowed to walk away from people who call your healing selfish. Because the truth is, your empathy is a gift, but when it's unprotected, it becomes currency for the emotionally bankrupt. And you're done being their ATM. You're done being their emergency contact. You're done bleeding for people who call your boundaries betrayal. So if you're reclaiming your peace today, write this in the comments: my empathy has limits. Say it, show it, live it. Because the most stoic, most powerful, most dangerous thing an empath can do is heal. Heal so deeply that they no longer attract people who only come to feed. Stay with me. Next, we're going into what happens when the storm finally hits, when the one they drained stops apologizing and starts walking away. Number 4, they thought your silence was surrender, but it was a storm loading. The most dangerous people aren't the loud ones, it's the quiet ones, because silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. My friends, if you've ever been the one who went quiet after being pushed too far, this one's for you. See, people who feed on control have a very fragile system. They rely on your reaction to validate their power. Your emotions, your tears, your confusion. It feeds their ego like oxygen feeds a flame. But when you go silent, when you stop arguing, stop explaining, stop chasing, that's when the oxygen runs out. And the fire they thought they controlled starts to burn them. Let's paint the picture. You've been the emotional first responder. Every time they started chaos, you showed up with calm. Every time they played mind games, you brought clarity. Every time they pushed your limits, you redrew the line with love. But there's a point, a sacred breaking point, where the soul says, no more. And that silence, that's not you giving up, that's you rising up. Imagine a volcano, not the loud, eruptive kind, the dormant kind, calm on the outside, holding centuries of pressure inside. To the untrained eye, it looks peaceful, controlled, but underneath there's movement, fire, transformation, and when it erupts, it doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't explain, it just changes everything in its path. That, my friends, is what your silence became, a force they never prepared for. Because here's the lie they believed: as long as you're quiet, you're weak. What they didn't realize is that silence isn't the absence of power, it's the presence of restraint. You weren't holding back because you were afraid. You were holding back because you were giving them a chance to grow, a chance to meet you halfway, a chance to choose maturity over manipulation. But they wasted it. And now they sit in the ruins of a connection they set fire to, stunned that you're no longer there to put it out. It's funny, isn't it? They never took your words seriously. They rolled their eyes when you said, "I'm tired," laughed when you said, "I need space," ignored you when you whispered, "I'm not okay." But the moment you said nothing at all, that's when the panic started. Because silence doesn't beg, silence doesn't plead, silence doesn't give them another round of emotional chess. Silence walks. They thought they had you mapped out, predictable, kind, forgiving, always ready to understand, even when you were the one bleeding. So when you stopped replying, when you didn't explain your distance, when your presence disappeared without warning, they were left with a version of you they had never seen before. And that version didn't come to play. That version came to heal. And here's where it hurts them most. Not in the silence itself, but in what the silence represents. It means they no longer have access to your peace, to your energy, to your forgiveness. It means they no longer get to hear your voice softening their shame. No more emotional rescues, no more last-minute grace, just distance, just consequence, just the echo of what they lost. They told themselves you'd never leave, that your silence was just another part of the cycle, that you'd come back, because you always did. But what they didn't know is that silence is where survivors go to reset, where warriors go to rebuild. You didn't disappear out of fear, you disappeared out of self-respect, because staying any longer would have meant abandoning yourself. And you finally chose you. That's what they'll never admit, that you didn't storm out, you just stopped showing up. You didn't slam the door, you just stopped opening it. And now they're left checking the locks, replaying the last time they felt your energy, wondering when the shift happened. But they know. Oh, they know. It was the moment they crossed the last boundary you hadn't even spoken out loud yet. That invisible line that said, "One more time, and I'm gone." And now, they sit in silence too. But it's not the kind of silence you chose. It's not peace. It's paranoia. It's regret. It's scrolling through your posts, wondering how you got even better without them. It's hearing your name in rooms they no longer have access to. It's watching you rebuild what they tried to break and realizing you were the one holding everything together the whole time. So if you're in that quiet place now, where the world thinks you've fallen off, but really you're just refueling, don't doubt it. Don't break your silence just to remind them what they lost. Let them feel it. Let them wonder. Let the silence do what your words never could. If you're done explaining yourself, write this in the comments right now. My silence is power. Let them hear it in your absence. Let them feel it in every moment they reach for you and realize you're no longer within reach. Stay with me, because next, we talk about that moment you stop waiting, stop hoping, and finally walk away. And how that moment isn't destruction, it's your rebirth. Number 5, they thought walking away was cruel, but it was survival. Sometimes, the kindest thing you'll ever do for yourself is to stop showing up for people who wouldn't even notice if you disappeared. Let that sit with you, my friends, because we're not talking about rage today. We're not talking about slamming doors or dramatic exits. We're talking about the silent, gut-wrenching decision to protect your soul, to choose healing over habit, peace over history. And let me be clear, they thought it was cruel. They thought your absence was punishment. But it wasn't. It was survival. You see, they don't understand what it takes for someone like you to walk away. You're not the type to give up. You're not the type to quit when it gets hard. You're the one who always tries again, the one who holds space, the one who gives chances long after they've been earned. So when you finally did walk, that wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-rescue. Let's go there. Imagine a house slowly filling with smoke. At first, it's just a faint burn in the air, a little sting in your eyes. You tell yourself, it's fine, it'll pass. But then the smoke thickens. Breathing becomes hard. The walls feel like they're closing in. And still, you stay. You crack a window. You hope the fire will put itself out. Until one day you realize it won't. And if you don't get out, you won't survive. That's what walking away was. Not a betrayal, but a breath of air, a return to clarity. But here's the problem. They never expected it. They thought your loyalty had no limit, that no matter how they acted, you'd keep showing up. They grew comfortable in your discomfort. They believed that because you stayed through their worst, you'd stay through anything. And so when you finally said enough, it shocked them. Because they mistook your endurance for weakness, your consistency for dependence. They told themselves lies to protect their ego. You were cold. You changed. You gave up too easily. But none of that was true, and deep down, they know it. You didn't walk away without trying. You walked away after trying too much. You walked away after warning, after praying, after compromising pieces of yourself, hoping they'd notice, hoping they'd care. They didn't. So you did what they never thought you'd do. You left. And it wasn't easy, was it? You didn't leave with dry eyes. You didn't walk away smiling. You left shaking, crying, grieving not just the person, but the version of you that believed they would eventually see your worth. You weren't just mourning the relationship, you were mourning your own denial, the way you silenced your needs just to keep the connection, the way you bent until you broke, the way you begged your intuition to be wrong, again. But here's the miracle. You left anyway. You left the fire and chose breath. You left the war and chose peace. You left the prison and chose the unknown. And that is not cruelty. That is courage. You stopped explaining. You stopped pleading. You stopped editing yourself just to avoid another argument. You stopped waiting for the apology, the change, the miracle that never came. And when you left, it wasn't to hurt them. It was to stop hurting yourself. And here's what they'll never tell you, but it's true. They felt the shift. The minute you walked out of their life, something changed. Not just your presence, but the energy, the dynamic, the game, because they weren't just addicted to your attention, they were addicted to your forgiveness. And now they sit there with no one to absorb the blame, no one to take the fall, no one to soothe their chaos. Because you're no longer their emotional safety net, you're no longer their backup plan, you're no longer available. And that's what shakes them, because they thought you'd always be within reach, that they could ghost you, gaslight you, guilt-trip you, and still have you waiting. But they were wrong. Now they're confused, off balance, not because you punished them, but because you healed, because you didn't announce your departure. You just stopped replying, you stopped showing up, you stopped bleeding for people who celebrated your pain. And that's what walking away really is. It's not a war cry, it's a return to self. It's remembering that your peace matters too, that your heart isn't a landfill for other people's mess, that your time, your loyalty, your energy is expensive, and they can no longer afford it. So if you've made that decision, if you've walked out of the fire and finally felt air again, write this in the comments right now. I left to live. Let the world see it. Let your soul feel it. Because leaving isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of clarity, of freedom, of becoming the person you were always meant to be, before they taught you to forget. Stay with me, because next we'll talk about the part they never admit, how your absence became the silence they can't stop hearing, and how what you left behind now burns them from the inside out. Number 6. Now they burn in the fire they lit. You didn't set the fire, they did, but they never thought they'd be the ones to get burned when you walked away from the flames. Let that land, my friends, because here's the brutal irony: they started the fire with their lies, their emotional neglect, their little games and quiet cruelty. But now you're the one rising from the ashes, and they're the ones choking on the smoke of their own destruction. This isn't revenge. This is consequence. This is life showing them what happens when you play with someone who only ever wanted to see you win. They never thought you'd leave. They thought they'd keep pushing you, pulling you, stringing you along just enough to keep you hoping but never healing. They liked you confused. They liked you emotional. They liked you so drained that you couldn't even see the pattern. But when you finally woke up and left, oh, now suddenly you're cold. Now you're selfish. Now you're not the same person. No, you're not. You evolved. You elevated. You outgrew the version of you that accepted crumbs and called it care. And what are they doing now? Pretending, mostly. Pretending like they don't care. Pretending like you were never that important. Pretending like your absence isn't the loudest thing they hear when they try to fall asleep. But silence is a funny thing. It doesn't go away. It echoes. It repeats. It replays every version of you they didn't appreciate. Every word they ignored. Every effort they dismissed. Every time you said, "This hurts," and they told you you were overreacting. That silence? Now it's haunting them. Not because you cursed them, but because you finally left them alone with the truth. And here's what makes that burn worse. They had something real. You. You weren't a placeholder. You weren't an option. You were all in. You were loyalty. You were love. You were understanding. You were the kind of presence people pray for, and they treated you like background noise, until one day the song stopped playing, and now they scroll through people, they swipe through options, they post things for attention, hoping someone will notice them the way you used to. But it's empty. It's shallow. It's a poor replacement for what they lost. Because people like you don't come around twice. You don't clone emotional intelligence. You don't replicate that kind of patience. You don't find someone who sees your pain and still stays. But they thought you were replaceable. They thought another version of you would just show up. But what they're starting to realize is they had a one-time blessing and they fumbled it hard. And no, you're not watching their downfall. That's the best part. You're not stalking their feed. You're not asking mutual friends what they're up to. You're not waiting for their apology. You're busy. You're building. You're healing. You're loving yourself in a way they never knew how to love you. And that is what burns them most, that they thought you'd fall apart without them, and instead you flourished. See, they didn't just lose a partner. They lost a mirror that showed them who they could be if they chose growth over ego, but they shattered it. They ran from the reflection, and now they're left staring into the void they created, haunted by your glow. You don't need to gloat. You don't need to say, "I told you so." The silence is doing that for you. And let's talk about that silence, because it's not empty. It's filled with everything they ignored. Your laughter, your support, your consistency, your late-night "Are you okay?" texts, your ability to forgive things no one else would have. That silence is now their new soundtrack. And no matter how many distractions they chase, no matter how many people they try to replace you with, it doesn't go away. Because you weren't just good to them, you were good for them, and they'll spend the rest of their life realizing that. Not because you hurt them, but because they hurt themselves by hurting you. So if you're sitting in your peace right now, not waiting, not looking back, but building. Write this in the comments. Let them burn. And don't say it with rage. Say it with grace, because you didn't light the fire. You just walked away from it. And now it's doing what it was always meant to do. Destroy what never deserved your energy in the first place. Stay with me, because next, we're going deeper. We're going to talk about the moment you finally stopped chasing closure and found something so much better. Clarity. Number 7, you don't need closure when you have clarity. Closure is just another word for hoping the person who broke you can be the one to fix you. That's the trap, my friends. That's the lie we're sold over and over again. That healing requires one last conversation, one final explanation, one neatly tied ending where they suddenly wake up, say sorry, and confess they knew your worth all along. But here's the truth. Clarity is what sets you free, not closure. And the moment you realize that, that's the day your life begins again. You spent so long waiting, didn't you? Checking your phone, replaying the last words, hoping for the "I messed up" text, the "I see it now" call. You wanted them to own it, to finally acknowledge that you gave more than they ever deserved. But they didn't. And maybe they never will. Because some people can't give you closure, not because you don't deserve it, but because giving it would require them to feel something they've spent their whole life running from: guilt. Let me give you a visual. Imagine standing at a broken window, holding every piece of shattered glass, hoping they'll come back and help you rebuild it. But they're not coming. They've already walked off, leaving you bleeding, palms cut open, staring at the mess they made. And here's the part that stings. They don't even look back. You're left with the silence, the wreckage, the echoes of what never got said. But one day, you stop waiting at that window. You let the glass fall, you bandage your hands, and you walk away, not because it's finished, but because you're finished waiting. That's clarity. It doesn't need their validation. It doesn't need their explanation. It's the knowing, deep in your bones, that you've outgrown the version of you that would keep standing in that same spot, hoping for closure that will never come. They said you were cold, that you moved on too fast, that you didn't even give them a chance to explain. But what they'll never admit is that you gave them 1,000 chances. And every time, they chose ego over empathy. You wanted understanding. They wanted control. You craved truth. They offered silence. So you stopped showing up for a battle that was never yours to begin with. And that, my friends, isn't bitterness. That's emotional evolution. See, closure is nice, but it's not necessary. You don't need an apology to forgive. You don't need their permission to grow. You don't need a confession to reclaim your peace. You are allowed to walk away mid-sentence. You are allowed to end the story without asking the villain how they feel about it, because your healing isn't dependent on their awareness. It's born from your decision to let go of the illusion that they hold the key to your peace. And here's the part that no one talks about. Sometimes closure is the silence. Sometimes closure is them never reaching out. Sometimes closure is you realizing they were never capable of loving you the way you loved them, and instead of feeling devastated, you feel done. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself more. That's when you win. When you no longer check their page. When you no longer hope they see your glow up. When your progress becomes so internal, so sacred, that their name no longer lives in your thoughts. That's not forgetting. That's reclaiming. That's what clarity gives you. The ability to move forward without needing to carry their guilt or their ghost. So no, you don't need to go back and have one last conversation. You don't need to explain what they already know. You don't need to keep reopening wounds just to show them how deeply they cut. They know. Even if they pretend they don't, they know. And that truth, that's their burden now. not yours. Let them deal with the silence. Let them sit with the version of themselves they tried to hide. Let them realize, too late, that the person who once gave everything is no longer reachable. Not out of hate, but out of healed distance, out of dignity. So if you're finally releasing the need for closure, if you're choosing clarity over chaos, write this in the comments right now. I choose clarity. Say it. Claim it. Let it echo beyond your screen. Because this isn't just a decision, it's a declaration that you are no longer waiting at locked doors, that you are no longer shrinking for the comfort of those who never intended to understand you, that your story continues without them, without the apology, without the final bow. And if this spoke to your soul, do something for yourself right now. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel. This is where your healing sharpens, where truth meets clarity, where you learn to stand in silence and let your peace do the talking. We drop new videos every day to elevate your mindset, protect your energy, and keep you rooted in emotional intelligence. Because you don't need closure, you need clarity, you need peace, you need you. And that, my friends, is the only ending you ever needed.